The sun hung low over Helena, Montana, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of copper and gold. It was October 1889, and winter's first breath had already settled over the mining town that sprawled across Last Chance Gulch like a promise half kept. Up on Westside Hill, where the wealthy built their monuments to fortune, the Thornton mansion stood silent against the darkening sky, larger than the Catholic church below, lonelier than a grave. Inside that grand house of imported oak and crystal chandeliers, Jackson Thornton sat in his study, a room that smelled of leather and old cigars, surrounded by the trappings of success that felt increasingly like a prison. He was 65 years old, though his hands were still steady, his back still straight. His hair had gone silver, but his eyes remained sharp, the pale gray of winter sky. On the wall behind him hung a portrait, 8 feet tall, of a family that no longer existed. Margaret, his wife, her face frozen in that knowing smile she'd worn when she was healthy, before the consumption took her 3 years back. William, their son, captured at 28, just 2 months before the mine collapse that killed him and 3 other men he tried to save. Jackson stared at the contract spread across his mahogany desk. Thornton Copper and Mining Company. Sale price, $2.3 million. The Eastern Syndicate was offering him more money than most men could dream of in 10 lifetimes. All he had to do was sign. All he had to do was admit that the empire he'd built from nothing, from bloody hands and broken backs in the darkness beneath the earth, meant nothing without someone to leave it to. His pen hovered over the signature line. Outside, a hawk cried, sharp and lonely. A knock at the door broke his paralysis. Emma, his housekeeper of 20 years, stepped into the room. She was 70 if she was a day, with hands gnarled from work and eyes that still missed nothing. She carried a silver tray with a single envelope on it. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Thornton, but this just arrived from the law offices of your brother." Jackson's hand froze. The pen clattered to the desk. "Samuel's been dead 6 months, Emma." "I know that, sir, but the letter bears his seal, and it's addressed to you in his hand." Emma set the tray down and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the vast room. Jackson stared at the envelope as if it might burst into flames. His brother's handwriting, unmistakable even after all these years. The careful loops of the S, the way Samuel always pressed too hard on the downstrokes, leaving little furrows in the paper. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside, he found 3 items: a letter, written on Samuel's personal stationery, a small brass key, old and tarnished, and a hand-drawn map, the ink faded at the edges, showing a route into the Absaroka Range. Jackson unfolded the letter. His brother's voice seemed to rise from the page, clear as a bell, as if Samuel were standing right there in the room with him. "Jackson, my brother, if you are reading this, I am dead. Not an accident, though they will call it that. Malcolm Vance had me killed, and I knew it was coming. I am not afraid. I lived as a free man, and I will die as one. But I cannot die in silence. I have been investigating Vance for 8 months. The man is a monster wrapped in expensive suits and political connections. He has been defrauding the Crow people of their land through forgery, bribery, and coercion. I have evidence. It is hidden in our old cabin in the Absaroka, the one we built together in 1844 when we were young and thought we could conquer the world with nothing but our hands and our dreams. The key will open the safe. You know the combination, our mother's birthday. But Jackson, there is something more important than evidence. There is a woman, her name is Nahia. Winter Deer in the Crow tongue. She is 28 years old, pregnant, and being forced to marry Malcolm Vance. Her husband, a Crow warrior named Standing Bear, died in a skirmish with cavalry 5 months ago. Vance wants her because through her unborn child, he can claim control over 50,000 acres of Crow treaty land. The Dawes Act has made monsters of men who were already devils. I tried to help her. I hid her in our cabin, but Vance found out, and now I am a dead man walking. By the time you read this, I will have walked my last mile. Here is what I ask of you, brother, not as a favor, but as the price of blood between us. Find Nahia, protect her and her child. Use the evidence I gathered to destroy Vance. Do not let William's death be the end of the Thornton line's capacity for good. Do not let my death be meaningless. You and I, we came to Montana with nothing. We found gold, yes, but we also found something more. We found the kind of country where a man could make himself into whatever he chose. I chose justice. You chose empire. Neither of us chose family when we should have. Now I give you one last chance. Be the man our father taught us to be. The cabin coordinates are on the map. Go alone. Trust no one but Marshall Cooper. He is one of the good ones, and he knows about my investigation. And Jackson, one more thing. You still owe me $50 from that poker game in 1858. I will consider the debt paid if you do what is right. Your brother, Samuel P.S., the woman, Nahia. She is strong. She speaks English well, educated by the mission schools. She will not be easy to save because she does not want to be saved in the way most white men think of saving. She wants justice, not charity. Treat her as an equal, and she will teach you more than you ever taught William. Jackson read the letter 3 times. His eyes burned, but no tears came. He was too old for tears, too practiced at swallowing grief like bitter medicine. But his chest felt tight, as if an iron band were slowly crushing his ribs. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town below. Gas lamps were beginning to flicker to life as dusk settled. Somewhere down there, Malcolm Vance was sitting in his club, drinking brandy, laughing with judges and politicians, secure in the knowledge that he had won, that he always won. Jackson thought of William. The last time they had spoken, it had been an argument. Jackson had criticized his son's engineering plans for the new mine shaft, called them too cautious, too expensive. William had stood there, 29 years old and still desperate for his father's approval, and said quietly, "I just want you to be proud of me, Father. Just once, I want to hear you say it." And Jackson, buried in ledgers and stress and the constant pressure of maintaining an empire, had said, "When you earn it, I will say it." 2 weeks later, William was dead, crushed under tons of rock while trying to pull 3 men to safety. A hero's death. And Jackson had never said the words, had never told his son that he was proud, that he loved him, that he would trade every dollar of his fortune for 5 more minutes to take back that conversation. Now Samuel was offering him a chance, not redemption exactly. You could not redeem a failure that large. But perhaps you could build something new on the ruins. Perhaps you could take another child, one who was not even born yet, and make sure that child grew up knowing there were men in this world who would fight for what was right. Jackson folded the letter and placed it in his breast pocket, over his heart. He picked up the key and the map. He walked to the study door and called for Emma. "Pack me provisions for 5 days. Hardtack, dried beef, coffee, enough for 2 people, maybe 3. And have James saddle Thunder." Emma appeared in the hallway, her face creased with worry. "Mr. Thornton, you cannot be serious. You are 65 years old. The mountains in October, it is madness." "Madness is sitting in this house, Emma, surrounded by portraits of dead people and contracts that mean nothing. I am going to the Absaroka Range. I will be back in a week. If I am not back in 2 weeks, give this letter to Marshall Cooper." He handed her a sealed envelope he had just written. It contained a copy of Samuel's letter and instructions for his estate. "You are a foolish old man," Emma said, but her voice was gentle. "I have been a fool for a long time," Jackson replied. "Perhaps it is time to be a different kind of fool, the kind who does something right before he dies." By the time the moon rose over Helena, Jackson Thornton was riding north, a 65-year-old man with a fortune in the bank and a debt he could never repay weighing on his shoulders. The horse beneath him was a 12-year-old bay gelding named Thunder, strong and sure-footed, the best animal in his stable. The rifle across his saddle was a Winchester Model 1873, chambered in 4440, oiled and loaded. The food in his saddlebags would last a week if he was careful. The determination in his heart would last until the job was done or he was dead. The night was clear and cold. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the dramas of men. Jackson rode through darkness and memory, and in his mind, he heard Samuel's voice from 50 years ago, when they were boys digging in the mud of Last Chance Gulch, dreaming of fortunes they had not yet found. "Jackson," Samuel had said, his hands black with creek mud and hope, "if I die out here, don't waste time grieving. Find something worth living for. Promise me." "I promise," Jackson had said. not knowing it was a promise that would take half a century to keep. The trail into the Absaroka Range was steep and treacherous even in good weather. In October, with frost on the rocks and ice in the shadows, it was a test of skill and nerve. But Jackson had ridden this country when it was younger, and so was he. He remembered every switchback, every treacherous ford, every place where the trail narrowed to nothing, and a man had to trust his horse more than his eyes. On the second day, he stopped to water Thunder at a creek that ran cold and clear over stones the color of rust. He knelt and drank from his cupped hands, and the water tasted like memory. He and Samuel had camped here in 18. They had been 20 and 18, respectively, full of vinegar and ignorance, convinced that fortune was just one more mile up the trail. They had found gold eventually, yes, but by then they had also found something else. They had found the knowledge that survival in this country required more than luck. It required loyalty, brotherhood, the willingness to split your last biscuit with the man beside you because tomorrow it might be you who was starving. Jackson pulled out Samuel's map and studied it by the afternoon light. The cabin was marked with an X, another 10 miles northwest, up near Eagle's Nest Ridge. He could make it by nightfall if he pushed hard, but pushing hard at 65 was not the same as pushing hard at 18. His back ached, his hands were stiff with cold despite his gloves. But he pushed anyway because the woman, Nahia, was up there somewhere. And if Samuel's letter was accurate, she had been alone and terrified for weeks. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the snow orange and red like fire on water, Jackson saw smoke, a thin gray thread rising from a stand of pine trees half a mile ahead. His hand went to his rifle. Smoke meant people. People could mean trouble, but smoke also meant the cabin. It had to be. He approached slowly, eyes scanning the trees for movement. Thunder sensed his tension and moved carefully, ears forward, nostrils flared. The forest was silent except for the whisper of wind in the high branches. Too silent. Where were the birds? Where were the small sounds of life that should have filled a forest at dusk? The cabin appeared through the trees like a ghost materializing. It was exactly as Jackson remembered. Logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney, a single door, two small windows. He and Samuel had built it in the summer of 18 Marmor when they thought they would be prospectors forever, moving from claim to claim, living rough and free. They had abandoned it years ago when they struck it rich and moved to Helena, but the structure had survived. Someone had kept it up. The roof looked sound. Firewood was stacked against the north wall. Jackson dismounted and tied Thunder to a tree. He pulled his Winchester from its scabbard and checked the load. 6 rounds in the tube, 1 in the chamber. He moved toward the cabin door, his boots silent on the pine needle carpet. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, and for a moment Jackson forgot to breathe. She was not what he expected. He had imagined someone broken, someone cowering. Instead, he saw strength. She was perhaps 5.5 feet tall, slender despite the obvious swell of her belly under a torn calico dress. Her face was the color of copper in firelight, her eyes black and sharp as obsidian. Her hair, long and dark as a raven's wing, fell loose around her shoulders. In her right hand she held a hunting knife. The blade, streaked with rust or blood, pointed directly at Jackson's chest. "Do not come closer, old man," she said. Her English was clear, only slightly accented. "I do not know you. I do not trust you. And I will cut you if you try to take me back to him." Jackson slowly lowered his rifle, pointing the barrel at the ground. He raised his left hand, palm out, the universal gesture of peace. "My name is Jackson Thornton. Samuel Thornton was my brother. He sent me to help you." The knife did not waver. "Samuel Thornton is dead. They killed him because he helped me. How do I know you are not one of them? How do I know this is not a trick?" "Because," Jackson said quietly, "if I wanted to take you back to Vance, I would have brought men. An old man alone is not much of a threat, is he?" Something flickered in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. She lowered the knife slightly. "You are Jackson Thornton, the Copper King?" "I was. Now I am just an old man trying to keep a promise to his brother." "May I come in? I have been riding for 2 days, and I am too old to sleep on the ground." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for deception. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she stepped back and opened the door wider. Come, but leave the rifle outside. And if you lie to me, if you try to hurt me or take my child, I will kill you. Do you understand? I understand, Jackson said. He leaned the Winchester against the door frame and entered. The interior of the cabin was smaller than he remembered, the way all places from childhood shrink when revisited. A single room, maybe 15 feet square, a fireplace with a fire burning low, casting dancing shadows. A rope bed in one corner, covered with what looked like a Hudson's Bay blanket. A rough-hewn table with two chairs. Supplies stacked along one wall, canned goods, sacks of flour and beans. Samuel had provisioned the place well. Nahia closed the door and bolted it. She moved to the far side of the room, keeping the table between them, the knife still in her hand. In the firelight, Jackson could see the bruises on her wrists, dark purple fading to yellow. Rope burns? She had been tied. Recently. Samuel gave me a letter, Jackson said. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket and held it out. He told me what Vance did to you, what he is trying to do. I came to help. She crossed the room slowly, took the letter and unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page, and as she read, her face changed. The hardness softened, the knife lowered. When she finished, she looked up at Jackson and her eyes were wet. Samuel was a good man. He tried to save me. He told me, wait here, I will get proof. I will take Vance to court. But then, her voice broke. Then they killed him. They made it look like an accident. His wagon going off the road, but I know. Vance sent men, and Samuel died because of me. Not because of you, Jackson said. Because of evil. There is a difference. Evil men do evil things. The people who stand against them sometimes die. That does not make it the fault of the people they were trying to save. Nahia set the knife down on the table. She pulled out one of the chairs and sat heavily, as if the weight of the world had suddenly become too much to carry standing up. She placed both hands on her swollen belly, a protective gesture that was both ancient and universal. The baby will come soon, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. I cannot have my child taken by that man. I will die first. Do you understand? I will kill myself and my baby before I let Vance touch either of us. The words were spoken calmly, matter-of-factly, which somehow made them more terrible. Jackson sat down across from her. Up close, he could see how young she was. 28, Samuel had said, but she looked younger in the firelight. Young and old at the same time, the way people look when they have seen too much suffering. You will not have to tend me, Jackson said. You will not have to run. We are going to fight him. With the law. Samuel left evidence. I came here to get it and to get you. We are going back to Helena, and we are going to destroy Malcolm Vance in a courtroom. Courts, she laughed, bitter and sharp. White man's courts do not protect Indians. They take our land. They break their promises. Why should I believe a court will help me now? Because, Jackson said, not all white men are liars. Some of us keep our promises. My brother did, and I will. On my honor, on the memory of my son, I swear to you, Nahia, I will not let Vance take your child. She stared at him for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water. Finally, she spoke. Why? Why do you care? You do not know me. You are rich. You have everything. Why would you risk your life for a Crow woman and her baby? Jackson looked at his hands. They were old hands, scarred and spotted with age. The hands of a man who had built an empire and lost everything that mattered. I had a son, he said quietly. William. He was 29 when he died. Died trying to save other men in a mine collapse. He died a hero. But I was not there. I was in San Francisco signing a contract, making more money I did not need. And before he died, the last time we spoke, I told him he was not good enough. I told him he had not earned my pride. He died never knowing that I loved him, never knowing that I would trade every dollar I ever made for one more hour with him. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. Samuel wrote to me. He said, do not let my death be meaningless. Do not let the Thornton name die without doing something right. Your baby, Nahia, your son. I cannot give William back his father. But I can give your son a chance at life, at freedom. And in doing that, maybe, just maybe, I can make William proud, even if he cannot see it. Nahia reached across the table. Her hand, small and rough with calluses, closed over his. She said nothing. Sometimes there are no words. Sometimes the only language is touch, the simple human connection of one wounded soul to another. They sat like that for a long time, the old white millionaire and the young crow woman, two people who should have been strangers, connected by grief and hope and the memory of a good man who had died trying to do what was right. Finally, Nahia spoke. There are men watching, Vance's men. They are in the hills. I see them sometimes. 3, maybe 4. They are waiting for me to run or for someone to come. They saw you arrive. Jackson felt ice in his spine. When did you last see them? This morning. 2 men on horses watching from the ridge to the south. They did not come close. They are just watching. Like wolves waiting for the deer to weaken. Jackson stood and went to the window. He peered out through a gap in the shutters. The forest was dark now, the moon not yet risen. If there were men out there, he could not see them. But that did not mean they were not there. How many days have you been here alone? 16 days, since Samuel died. He told me, if I do not come back in 3 days, hide. Do not let them find you. So I hid, but I cannot hide forever. And when the baby comes, I will be helpless. Jackson turned back to face her. We leave tomorrow, first light. I will take you back to Helena. We will get you somewhere safe, and then we will go to court. They will not let us leave. Vance's men, they will try to stop us. Let them try. Nahia smiled, and it was a fierce smile, the smile of a warrior's widow. You are old, Jackson Thornton, but you have fire in you still. I see why Samuel loved you. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Jackson sat by the window, Winchester across his lap, while Nahia slept fitfully on the rope bed. He watched the darkness and remembered. Remembered William as a boy, 8 years old, asking, Father, when will you teach me about the mines? And Jackson, always busy, always distracted, saying, later, son, later. Later had never come. Near midnight, Jackson heard a sound. Not loud, just the soft crunch of a boot on frozen ground, the kind of sound a man makes when he is trying to be quiet, but forgets that in the stillness of a mountain night, every sound carries. Jackson eased the window shutter open a crack. Moonlight had risen now, painting the clearing in silver and shadow. He saw them, 3 men moving through the street on foot. They had left their horses somewhere back in the timber. They were approaching the cabin from 3 sides, surrounding it. Jackson moved to the bed. He touched Nahia's shoulder gently. She woke instantly, eyes wide, hand reaching for the knife she kept under her pillow. They are here, Jackson whispered. 3 men, surrounding the cabin. She sat up, her face calm. Then we fight. No, we talk first. Jackson crossed to the door. He picked up his rifle and levered around into the chamber, the metallic click loud in the small room. Then he opened the door and stepped out onto the rough plank porch. The 3 men froze. They had been caught in the open, not expecting the door to open. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of them, a tall man with a yellow beard and a slouch hat, raised his hand slowly. Easy there, old-timer. No need for gunplay. We are just looking for someone. I know who you are looking for, Jackson said. His voice was steady, the rifle in his hands equally so. And you are not taking her. Another man spoke up, shorter, wider, with a face like a shovel. That is not your business, Thornton. Yeah, we know who you are. Mr. Vance, he wants his wife back. She is his legal property. You are interfering. She is not property, and she is not his wife. That marriage was forced. I have proof. The third man laughed, a sound like gravel in a can. Proof does not matter. What matters is Mr. Vance has friends, judges, marshals, politicians. You think you can fight that with your money? You are just one old man. One old man, Jackson agreed. But I am not the one who is going to die tonight if you take another step toward this cabin. The bearded man, who seemed to be the leader, spat into the dirt. We do not want trouble, Thornton. Mr. Vance, he just wants what is his. You hand over the squaw and the baby when it comes. We all walk away. You keep your money, your life, everything. You fight us, you will lose. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Accidents happen to old men in these mountains. Threats, Jackson said. Is that all Vance has? Threats and hired guns? He has the law, and the law is on his side. Then let the law decide. Tell Vance I will see him in court. Helena, 3 days from now, he can bring in his lawyers, his judges, his politicians. I will bring the truth. We will see who wins. The bearded man shook his head slowly. You are making a mistake, old man. A big mistake. I have made a lot of mistakes in my life, Jackson said. This is not one of them. Now get off my property before I decide that shooting you would improve the neighborhood. For a long moment, the three men stood there, calculating odds, weighing options. Then the bearded man shrugged and turned away. The other two followed. They melted into the trees like smoke, and within seconds the clearing was empty, except for Jackson standing on the porch, rifle in hand, heart pounding in his chest like a hammer on an anvil. Behind him, Nahia stepped out of the cabin. She stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her despite the cold night air. They will not give up, she said. I know. They will follow us. They will try to stop us before we reach Helena. I know. So we take a different trail, a trail white men do not know. Jackson looked at her. What trail? She smiled, and in the moonlight she looked like something carved from stone, beautiful and terrible and strong. A sacred trail through the high passes. It is hard, dangerous, but if we can make it, we will reach Helena 2 days before they expect us. We will have time to prepare, time to fight. Can you make it, in your condition? I am Crow, she said simply. We are born in hardship. We die in hardship. The in-between is just details. I can make it. Can you? Jackson thought about his 65 years, his aching back, his stiff joints, his heart that sometimes fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird. Then he thought about William, about Samuel, about the chance to do something right before he died. I can make it, he said. They left before dawn, while the stars still burned cold and bright overhead. Jackson led Thunder, loaded with supplies. Nahia walked beside him, moving with surprising grace despite her pregnancy. She led them north, into country Jackson had never seen, up trails that were barely trails at all, more like suggestions carved by deer and elk into the living stone of the mountains. The sun rose behind them, setting the eastern sky aflame. The air was thin and cold, searing in the lungs, but they climbed and they did not look back. By mid-morning, they reached a place in Nahia called Eagle's Nest Ridge. The trail here was a knife edge, a narrow path of broken rock with a 1,000-foot drop on either side. Thunder balked, eyes rolling white with fear. Jackson did not blame the horse. He felt the same fear, cold and sharp in his gut. We must go one at a time, Nahia said. The horse first. Talk to him. Make him trust you. Jackson took Thunder's reins and looked into the animal's eyes. Easy, boy. Easy. We have been through worse than this, you and I. Remember that blizzard in '72? Remember when we outran that rock slide near Butte? This is nothing. Just 1 foot in front of the other. Just trust me. He stepped onto the narrow trail. Thunder followed, one hesitant step at a time. The wind screamed around them, trying to pluck them off the mountain and hurl them into the void. But Jackson kept talking, kept moving, and Thunder kept following. 50 yards, 100, 200, and then they were across, standing on solid ground again, both of them shaking. Nahia crossed next, moving like a mountain goat, sure-footed and fearless. When she reached the other side, she was breathing hard, one hand pressed to her belly. Are you all right? Jackson asked. The baby kicks. He does not like the cold, or maybe he is telling me to hurry. Children are impatient. They want to be born. They do not understand that the world is not always ready for them. They rested for 10 minutes, eating hardtack and dried beef, washing it down with water so cold it made their teeth ache. Then they moved on. The second day was harder. The trail climbed higher, above the tree line into a world of rock and ice and wind. They passed through a place Nahia called the Crying Caves, where the wind howled through holes in the stone and made sounds like voices, like the ghosts of all the people who had died in these mountains crying out in eternal sorrow. Jackson's hands were numb despite his gloves. His feet felt like blocks of ice in his boots. But he kept moving because Nahia was moving. And if a pregnant woman could endure this, then an old man could at least pretend to be strong. That night, they camped in a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock. Jackson built a small fire using the last of his matches and some dry wood he had carried from lower down. They huddled close to the flames, sharing the single blanket Jackson had brought. "Tell me about Standing Bear," Jackson said. "Your husband. What was he like?" Nahia stared into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "He was 25 when he died. Tall, strong. He could shoot an arrow through a coin at 50 paces. He loved to laugh. He made jokes, even about serious things. The elders said he should be more solemn, but he said life was too short for being solemn all the time. We married in the spring of 1888. My father, he was a chief, Red Sky. He approved. Standing Bear gave my father 3 horses and a rifle. I gave Standing Bear a blanket I had woven myself. It took me 4 months. Every thread was a prayer for our life together. We had 1 year, one perfect year, and then the cavalry came. There was a fight over water rights. Stupid. So stupid. Men dying over which people get to drink from a stream that has water enough for everyone. Standing Bear, he was trying to protect the women and children. He told them to run while he and the other warriors held the line. He died with 7 bullet holes in him. But the women and children, they escaped. So he won. But I lost. She touched her belly, her fingers spread wide as if she could feel the child within reaching back. This baby is all I have left of him, all I have left of love. And that is why I will die before I let Vance take him. Do you understand now, Jackson Thornton? This is not about land or money or even justice. This is about love. This is about a woman protecting the last piece of her heart. Jackson understood. He understood all too well. He reached out and took her hand, and they sat like that. 2 damaged people holding on to each other in the darkness, while the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead in their cold and ancient dance. On the 3rd day, they reached a place in Nahia called Medicine Wheel Plateau. Here, in a clearing of wind-blasted stone, someone long ago had laid out rocks in a great circle, with lines radiating from the center like the spokes of a wheel. It was old, this place. Older than the Crow, older perhaps than any people whose names were still remembered. It had the feel of sacred ground, the kind of place where the boundary between the world of flesh and the world of spirit grew thin. Nahia stopped at the edge of the circle. She set down the pack she had been carrying and turned to face the east, where the sun was just beginning to climb above the peaks. "I must pray," she said. "Wait here." Jackson watched as she walked to the center of the stone wheel. She knelt, her hands raised to the sky, and began to chant in a language he did not know, a language that sounded like wind and water and the cries of birds. The words rose and fell, rhythmic and strange, and as she sang, the wind seemed to grow still, as if the mountain itself were listening. Jackson felt something in his chest, a tightness, a pressure, as if his heart were trying to break free from the cage of his ribs. He thought of William, he thought of Samuel, he thought of all the years he had wasted chasing money and power and respect from men whose opinions meant nothing. And he thought that perhaps, here on this frozen plateau, in the presence of this young woman who had already lost everything and was still fighting, he was finally beginning to understand what mattered. When Nahia finished her prayer, she stood and walked back to Jackson. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. "The spirits have heard," she said. "They say we will reach Helena safely. They say there will be a fight, but we will not be alone. And they say you are a good man, Jackson Thornton. They call you Wolf Who Returns. Do you know what that means?" Jackson shook his head. Nahia pointed to his coat. On the back, embroidered by Margaret years ago, was the image of a wolf, the symbol of the Thornton family. Samuel's idea, something about loyalty and strength. "The wolf is a sacred animal to my people," Nahia said. "When a wolf leaves the pack, we say he is dead. But if he returns, he is reborn, stronger, wiser. You left your life, Jackson. You left your money, your comfort, your safety. You came into these mountains to help a stranger. You have returned to what matters. The spirits see this. They bless you." Jackson did not know what to say. He was not a religious man. He had not been inside a church since Margaret's funeral. But standing there in that ancient place with the wind singing through the stones, and a woman who had more faith in her little finger than he had in his entire body, he felt something. A presence, a warmth despite the cold, a sense that he was not alone, that he had never been alone, that there were forces in this world larger than money and power and the petty cruelties of men like Malcolm Vance. "Thank you," he said. It seemed inadequate, but it was all he had. They descended from the plateau and began the long trek down the eastern slope of the Absaroka Range. Below them, far in the distance, Jackson could see the smoke of Helena rising into the sky, a smudge of gray against the blue. Home, safety, or at least the promise of it. But as they descended, moving through a narrow canyon where the rock walls pressed close on either side, Nahia suddenly stopped. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly, her face going pale. "What is it?" Jackson asked, already knowing, already feeling ice flood his veins. "The baby," she whispered. "The baby is coming. Now." The canyon walls rose steep and unforgiving on either side. Gray stone streaked with rust and ice. Jackson Thornton stood frozen. A 65-year-old man who had faced down claim jumpers, survived cave-ins, negotiated with robber barons, and never once felt the kind of raw panic that now flooded his chest like ice water. Nahia doubled over, her breath coming in sharp gasps, one hand pressed against the canyon wall for support, the other cradling her swollen belly. Her face had gone the color of old parchment, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold mountain air. "How long?" Jackson managed to force the words through his constricted throat. "How long until the baby comes?" "I do not know," she gasped. "Hours, maybe. My mother told me stories. First babies take time, but the pain, it is strong already." Jackson's mind raced. They were still 5 miles from Helena, 5 miles of rough terrain, and night was coming fast. The temperature would drop below freezing once the sun set. A woman giving birth in the open, in these conditions, the baby would not survive. The mother might not either. "Can you ride?" he asked. "If I put you on Thunder, can you hold on?" She shook her head, teeth gritted against another wave of pain. "Too much movement. It will make it worse. We need shelter. Now." Jackson scanned the canyon. There, about 200 yards ahead, a dark opening in the rock face. A palm or an overhang, some kind of protection from the wind at least. It would have to be enough. He moved to Nahia's side, wrapped his arm around her waist. "Lean on me. We are going to that cave. Just 200 yards. You can make it." They moved together, step by agonizing step. Nahia bit back cries of pain, reduced to whimpers that tore at Jackson's heart. Thunder followed behind, patient and steady, the best horse a desperate man could ask for. The 200 yards felt like 2 miles, but finally they reached the cave mouth. It was not much. A shallow depression in the rock, maybe 12 feet deep, barely tall enough for Jackson to stand upright. But it was dry, sheltered from the wind, and there was old wood scattered near the back, left by some prospector or hunter years ago. It would do. It had to. Jackson spread his bedroll on the stone floor, helped Nahia lie down. Her breathing was rapid now, shallow. Her eyes had that distant look of someone turning inward, focusing on the primal work her body was doing. "I need to start a fire," Jackson said. "I need to boil water. I need..." He realized he had no idea what he needed. He had been present for exactly 0 births in his 65 years. Margaret had sent him away when William was born, told him to go drink with the other men and come back when it was over. This was women's work, she had said. Men just got in the way. But there were no women here. There was only him. Nahia reached out and grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me. You must listen. I will tell you what to do. Boil water. Find something clean, cloth or leather. When the baby comes, you must catch him. You must cut the cord. Do you have a knife?" "Yes." "Heat it in the fire first. Make it clean. Then cut. Not too close to the baby's belly. Leave some cord. Tie it off with thread if you have it, or thin leather. Do you understand?" Jackson nodded, though his hands were shaking. "I understand." And Jackson, her eyes locked on his, fierce and clear despite the pain. "If something goes wrong, if I do not live, you must take my baby. Promise me, take him to my people, to Chief Plenty Coups. Tell him his grandson must be raised crow. Promise me. You are going to live, Jackson said, his voice rough. Both of you are going to live. I did not come all this way to watch you die. She smiled, a ghost of that fierce warrior smile. Then you better start a fire, old man. This baby, he is impatient like his father. Jackson worked faster than he had moved in years. He gathered the old wood, found it dry and brittle, perfect for burning. His hands fumbled with the matches, but on the third try, he got a spark, then a flame, then a fire that grew and crackled, and threw dancing shadows on the cave walls. He filled his tin cup with snow, set it at the edge of the fire to melt and boil. He pulled out his hunting knife, held it in the flames until the steel glowed faintly red. Behind him, Nahiya was humming, a low, rhythmic sound, something between a song and a chant. It helped her, he realized, helped her focus, gave her something to do with the pain besides scream. The hours that followed were the longest of Jackson Thornton's life, longer than the day he waited to hear if the mine collapse had killed his son, longer than the night he sat beside Margaret's bed, watching consumption steal her breath by painful degrees. Time became elastic, stretching and warping, measured not in minutes but in contractions, in cries that Nahiya could no longer hold back, in the gradual darkening of the sky beyond the cave mouth. Jackson knelt beside her, helpless and terrified. This man who had commanded hundreds of workers, who had moved mountains of ore, who had built an empire from nothing. None of it mattered here. Here he was, just a frightened old man trying to remember half-understood instructions, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in. Twice Nahiya's bleeding worsened, dark blood soaking the cloth faster than Jackson could replace it. His hands shook as he pressed fresh fabric against her, certain he was watching her die. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Your son needs you. Stay." Nahiya's eyes opened, glassy with pain, but fierce. "I am Crow. We are born in blood. We do not die easy." The bleeding slowed. Jackson would never know if it was the pressure, some instinct he could not name, or sheer stubborn will. But she held on. The baby kept coming. "I can see the head," Nahiya gasped at one point, her hand reaching down. "The baby is coming. You must be ready." Jackson positioned himself, hands outstretched, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. And then, with a final cry that echoed off the stone walls like the shriek of a hunting eagle, Nahiya pushed, and the baby slid into Jackson's waiting hands. For a moment the child was silent, and Jackson felt his heart stop. But then the tiny chest hitched, the mouth opened, and a cry split the air. Not a weak cry, but a full-throated howl of rage at being thrust from warmth into cold, from darkness into firelight. "A boy," Jackson whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. "A strong boy." He used the boiled water to clean the child as best he could, wrapped him in the cleanest cloth he had, a shirt from his pack that had never been worn. Then he handed the bundle to Nahiya, who clutched her son to her chest, sobbing and laughing at the same time. "Samuel," she whispered. "His name is Samuel. Samuel Standing Bear Thornton. For your brother. For my husband. For you." Jackson could not speak. His throat had closed up entirely. He could only nod and turn away, ostensibly to tend the fire, but really to hide the fact that he was crying like a child himself, overcome by a rush of emotion so powerful it threatened to split him apart. He had not been there when William was born. He had not been there when William died. But he was here now, for this child, this impossibly small and perfect human who had just fought his way into a world that would not be kind to him. And Jackson swore, there in that cave with firelight dancing on ancient stone, that he would protect this boy, that he would give him every chance, every opportunity, every ounce of love and support that he had failed to give his own son. They rested in the cave that night. Jackson kept the fire burning, feeding it constantly, terrified that if it went out, the cold would take them. Nahiya slept fitfully, the baby at her breast. Jackson sat watch, rifle across his lap, and listened to the night sounds of the mountains, the wind in the rocks, the distant cry of a wolf, the small, snuffling sounds of a newborn breathing. Near dawn, he heard something else. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming up the canyon from the south. Jackson eased to the cave mouth and peered out. In the gray pre-dawn light, he could see them. 4 riders moving at a steady pace, searching. Vance's men. They had followed the trail, probably figured out the route Nahia had taken, were trying to intercept them before they reached Helena. Jackson moved back into the cave, touched Nahia's shoulder gently. She woke instantly, eyes alert. "They are coming," he whispered. 4 of them. "We need to move, but you are in no condition to ride." "Then you go," she said. "Take Thunder and ride for Helena. Get help. Come back for us." "I am not leaving you." "Jackson, you stubborn old fool, they will kill you. 1 old man with a rifle against 4 hired guns? Those are not good odds." "I have faced worse odds," Jackson lied. "And I made a promise. I keep my promises." He moved to the cave mouth, levered around into his Winchester, and stepped out to meet whatever was coming. The 4 riders had stopped about 50 yards away. They sat their horses in a line, backlit by the rising sun, looking like something from a dime novel. 4 men against 1. They knew they had the advantage. The man in the center walked his horse forward a few paces. Jackson recognized him. Thomas Whitmore, the Indian agent from Crow Agency, the man who had accepted bribes from Vance to force Nahia into marriage. Whitmore was in his 50s, soft around the middle, with the face of a bureaucrat who had sold whatever soul he once possessed for money and comfort. "Mr. Thornton," Whitmore called out, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "This is foolish. You are 1 man. You have no chance. Hand over the woman and the child, and you can ride away. No one needs to get hurt." "The woman's name is Nahia," Jackson called back. "The child's name is Samuel. They are not property. They are people, and I will die before I let you take them." One of the other riders laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Die is what you will do, old man. You think that rifle makes you dangerous? We got 4 rifles, and we are younger, faster. You are just delaying the inevitable." Jackson raised his Winchester, sighted down the barrel at Whitmore. "Maybe, but I guarantee you, whoever comes through that cave mouth is going to have to step over your corpse to do it. You want to die first, Agent Whitmore? You want that on your gravestone? Shot dead while trying to kidnap a woman and her newborn baby? That is the legacy you want?" Whitmore's face darkened, but there was fear there too. Jackson could see it. The man was a coward at heart, the kind who would order violence but had no stomach for facing it himself. "You are making powerful enemies," Whitmore said. "Malcolm Vance has friends, judges, politicians, even the territorial governor. You cannot win this fight, Thornton. Even if you somehow get to Helena, even if you somehow make it to trial, we will crush you." "Then you will have to crush me," Jackson said, "because I am not moving, and the first man who tries to get past me is going to meet his maker." For a long moment, the 2 groups faced each other across the rocky ground. The tension stretched taut as a piano wire ready to snap. Jackson's finger rested on the trigger. His heart slammed against his ribs. He was too old for this. His hands were not as steady as they used to be. His eyes were not as sharp. But he had something the men across from him did not have. He had nothing left to lose. Then from the south, another sound. More hoofbeats. Many more. Jackson risked a glance and saw them coming up the canyon. At least 10 riders moving fast. At their head, a familiar figure. Marshal James Cooper, 60 years old and tough as boot leather. A man who had been Samuel's friend and who Jackson had sent word to from the cabin. "Whitmore," Cooper's voice boomed across the canyon. "Step away from that cave. You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and attempted kidnapping." Whitmore wheeled his horse around, his face going white. "Marshal Cooper, this is a misunderstanding. I am here on official business." "Official business, my left boot," Cooper snapped. He and his men spread out, surrounding the 4 riders. "I got testimony from 3 different Crow families about what you did, Whitmore. I got letters Samuel Thornton wrote before he died. I got enough evidence to hang you twice. Now get off that horse before I shoot you off it." The fight went out of Whitmore all at once, like air from a punctured balloon. He dismounted, hands raised. His 3 companions did the same. Cooper's deputies moved in, slapping irons on wrists, confiscating weapons. Cooper rode up to the cave, dismounted, approached Jackson. The old marshal's face was grim. "Samuel wrote to me before he died," Cooper said. "Told me to watch for you, to keep an eye out. When I heard you had left town, headed into the Absaroka, I figured you went after the woman." "I got his papers, Jackson. All the evidence he collected on Vance. It is damning. But getting it into court, that is going to be a fight." "I know," Jackson said. He lowered his rifle. His arms were shaking with fatigue. "But we have to Trueg." "There is something else," Cooper said, his voice dropping low. "Malcolm Vance made bail yesterday. $20,000. His lawyers got him out. He is free, Jackson, and he knows you have the woman." Jackson felt cold wash through him, colder than in the mountain wind. "How long until the trial?" "Judge Miller scheduled it for 5 days from now. But Miller, he is in Vance's pocket. Has been for years. We are going to need more than evidence. We are going to need a miracle." From inside the cave, a baby cried. Cooper's eyes widened. "She had the child?" "Last night, a boy, healthy and strong." Cooper shook his head slowly. "Then we better get them to safety fast, because Vance is not going to stop. Not now, not ever." They rigged a travois behind Cooper's horse, made Nahia and the baby as comfortable as possible. Then they began the final leg of the journey to Helena. Jackson rode beside the travois, rifle across his saddle, eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead and behind. Cooper rode point with 6 deputies spread out as outriders. They reached Helena by mid-afternoon. The town had changed in the 3 days Jackson had been gone, or perhaps he had changed and saw it differently now. The grand buildings, the paved streets, the electric lights just being installed, all the markers of civilization and progress. But underneath it all, he could see the rot, the injustice, the way men with money and power used the law as a weapon against those who had neither. Cooper took them directly to the marshal's office, a squat stone building that had once been a trading post. Inside, they placed Nahia in a back room that Cooper used for overnight prisoners when necessary. It had a cot, a stove, a barred window that looked out on an alley. Not comfortable, but safe. "She stays here until the trial," Cooper said. "I got men I trust guarding the door 24 hours a day. Vance would have to come through me to get to her." "He might try," Jackson said. "Let him. I have been wanting an excuse to shoot that snake for years." Jackson sat down heavily on a chair in Cooper's office. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. His bones ached. His head throbbed. He felt every one of his 65 years, plus about 20 more. Cooper poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept in his desk drawer. He handed one to Jackson. "To Samuel," Cooper said, raising his glass. "He was the best man I ever knew. Honest, brave, smart as hell. This town does not deserve what he did for it." "No town ever deserves its heroes," Jackson replied. He drank. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn, warming him from the inside. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jackson asked, "What are our chances? Honestly?" And Cooper grimaced. "Not good. Judge Miller will do everything he can to rule in Vance's favor. Vance has a marriage certificate, signed in by Whitmore, legally binding under territorial law. Nahia has no papers proving she was married to Standing Bear before that. In the eyes of the law, Vance is her legal husband, and the baby, by default, is his legal son. Even though it is not his blood? Blood does not matter. Legal paternity does. If Vance is married to the mother at the time of birth, he is the legal father. That is the law." Jackson felt anger rising in his chest, hot and bitter. "Then the law is wrong." "Maybe, but we still have to work within it. Samuel knew that. That is why he gathered evidence. Financial records showing Vance bribed Whitmore. Forged land deeds. Letters discussing the plan to force Nahia into marriage specifically to gain control of Crow land through the child. If we can prove the marriage was a fraud, entered into under duress for illegal purposes, we might be able to get it annulled." "Might?" "Miller is the problem. Even with evidence, he can rule however he wants, and Vance has too much influence." Jackson set down his whiskey glass. "Then we need someone who cannot be influenced. Someone who will represent Nahia and cannot be bought or scared off." Who? Samuel was the best lawyer in Montana, and they killed him. What about Elizabeth Brennan? Cooper's eyes widened. The woman lawyer from Boston? You are joking. I am not. Samuel spoke of her, said she was brilliant, honest, and had more courage than most men. She moved to Helena 2 years ago, open to practice. Samuel helped her win her first case when every other lawyer in town tried to drive her out. A woman lawyer in a Montana courtroom arguing against one of the territory's richest men, Cooper said slowly. Judge Miller will lose his mind. Good, Jackson said grimly. Let him lose it. Maybe while he is distracted by his own prejudices, we can slip the truth past him. That evening, Jackson went to see Elizabeth Brennan. Her office was on Bridge Street, above a saddle shop, a single room with a desk, 3 chairs, and shelves overflowing with law books. Elizabeth herself was 40 years old, tall and thin, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a gray dress, practical rather than fashionable, and when she shook Jackson's hand, her grip was firm. Mr. Thornton, she said, I heard you were back in town. I heard other things too. Things about a Crow woman and a dead man's evidence and Malcolm Vance making threats. All true, Jackson said. He told her everything. Samuel's letter, the cabin, the evidence, the journey through the mountains, the birth of the baby, the arrest of Whitmore. When he finished, Elizabeth sat back in her chair, fingers steepled, thinking. I will take the case, she said finally. I have not asked you yet. You did not need to. I knew Samuel. He was a good man. One of the few in this town who treated me like an equal, rather than a curiosity or a threat. I owe him. And more than that, this case, it is exactly what I came to Montana for. A chance to do something that matters. A chance to fight for someone who cannot fight for themselves. It will not be easy, Jackson warned. Vance has money and power. And we have the truth, Elizabeth replied. I know which I would rather have in a fight. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Elizabeth pored over the documents Samuel had collected, making notes, constructing arguments, anticipating every move Vance's lawyers might make. Jackson arranged for Chief Plenty Coos to be brought to Helena, along with 2 other Crow elders who had witnessed Nahia's marriage to Standing Bear. He hired the best stenographer in town to record every word of the trial. He even went to the Helena Independent newspaper, met with the editor, and made sure reporters would be present. Whatever happened in that courtroom, it would be public. Vance would not be able to hide behind closed doors. On the 4th day, Jackson visited Nahia at the marshal's office. She was sitting up, looking stronger, the baby asleep in a cradle Cooper had found somewhere. When Jackson entered, she smiled, and it transformed her face. You look better, Jackson said. I feel stronger. Marshal Cooper's wife brought food, real food, not hardtack and jerky, and she brought clothes for Samuel, little clothes, soft and warm. Jackson sat down on the edge of the cot. The baby stirred, made a small sound, settled again. So small, so vulnerable. This tiny life that had already been through so much. The trial starts tomorrow, Jackson said. Are you ready? I am afraid, Nahia admitted. I am afraid they will take him, that the white man's law will say I have no rights, that they will give my son to Vance and I will never see him again. Jackson took her hand. I will not let that happen. I swear to you, Nahia, I will spend every dollar I have. I will call in every favor. I will move heaven and earth before I let them take your son. Why, she asked, and it was not the first time she had asked this question. Why do you care so much? Because, Jackson said slowly, trying to find the right words, when William died, I realized I had spent his whole life teaching him the wrong things. I taught him how to make money. I taught him how to run a business. But I never taught him how to be kind, how to fight for what is right instead of what is profitable. He learned that on his own, despite me, and he died because of it. Died saving men whose lives I would have written off as acceptable losses. I cannot bring William back. I cannot tell him I am proud of him. But I can make sure another child grows up knowing that some men fight for justice, that some men keep their promises. That is not much of a legacy, but it is all I have left to give. Nahia squeezed his hand. It is enough, more than enough. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear, with frost painting the windows white and the sun rising like a copper coin in a pale sky. The Lewis and Clark County Courthouse was packed by 8 in the morning, though the trial was not scheduled to begin until 9. Word had spread, the Copper King versus the Land Baron, a Crow woman fighting for her child, a female lawyer arguing before a territorial judge. It was the kind of spectacle Helena had not seen in years. Jackson sat in the front row of the gallery, dressed in his finest suit, a black broadcloth that had cost more than most men earned in a year. Beside him sat Marshal Cooper. Behind them, Chief Plenty Coos and the two Crow elders, looking profoundly uncomfortable in a white man's building, surrounded by white man's law. At exactly 9 o'clock, Judge Harold Miller entered through a side door and took his seat behind the bench. Miller was 58, with a face like weathered granite and eyes cold as river stones. He had been a territorial judge for 15 years, appointed by men who expected loyalty and received it. "This court is now in session," Miller intoned. "The matter before us is Vance versus Nahia, also known as Winter Deer, regarding enforcement of marriage contract and custody of minor child. Mr. Pierce, you may present your opening statement." Jonathan Pierce stood. He was Malcolm Vance's lead attorney, brought in from San Francisco, expensive and ruthless. He was 45, impeccably dressed, with the kind of polished confidence that came from winning more often than losing. "Your Honor," Pierce began, his voice smooth as oil, "this is a simple matter of law. My client, Malcolm Vance, entered into a legal marriage contract with the defendant on September 15th of this year. The marriage was witnessed by Indian agent Thomas Whitmore and 2 other witnesses. It was properly recorded with the territorial government. Under the law, this makes Mr. Vance and the defendant husband and wife. 2 weeks after this marriage, the defendant fled. She left her legal home, abandoned her legal husband, and went into hiding. Mr. Vance searched for her, not out of malice, but out of concern for her welfare and the welfare of the child she was carrying. 3 days ago, that child was born, a son. According to territorial law, any child born during a legal marriage is the legal issue of that marriage. This makes Mr. Vance the legal father, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The defendant now claims the marriage was invalid, that it was entered into under duress, but she has no evidence. She has no witnesses. She has only her word, and I regret to say, Your Honor, that the word of a woman who abandoned her husband and hid from the law for weeks is not credible. We ask the court to enforce the marriage contract and grant Mr. Vance custody of his son. That is all we seek, justice under the law." Pierce sat down. Jackson felt his stomach turn. The argument was simple, clear, and legally sound. Without counter-evidence, Nahia would lose. It would be that simple. Elizabeth Brennan stood. She was wearing a dark blue dress, buttoned to the throat, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her face look severe. She carried no notes. She walked to the center of the courtroom and stood there for a moment while letting the silence stretch, letting every eye in the room focus on her. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was clear and strong, "the opposing counsel has presented what he calls a simple matter of law. But the law is never simple when it is used to justify evil. And what Malcolm Vance has done to Nahia is evil, pure and simple." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Miller's eyes narrowed. "Counselor, you will refrain from inflammatory language." "I will not, Your Honor, because sometimes the truth is inflammatory. Sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable, but it is still the truth. Nahia did not choose to marry Malcolm Vance. She was forced. She was threatened. She was told that if she did not sign the marriage certificate, 300 Crow people living at the agency would be evicted with winter coming. She was told her people would starve. She signed because she had no choice. That is not marriage. That is coercion. And why did Malcolm Vance want this marriage? Not because he loved Nahia, not because he wanted a family, but because he wanted land. Under the Dawes Act, if Nahia's child has a white father, that child can claim an allotment of 160 acres of prime land. And the father as guardian controls that land. Malcolm Vance was not marrying a woman. He was stealing a birthright. "Objection!" Pierce was on his feet. "Conjecture and slander." "I have evidence," Elizabeth said calmly. She turned to the gallery. "Mr. Thornton, if you please." Jackson stood. He had been carrying a leather satchel, and now he brought it forward and handed it to Elizabeth. She opened it and began removing documents. financial ledgers, letters, a phonograph cylinder in a protective case. These documents, Elizabeth said, spreading them on the table before the judge, were collected by Samuel Thornton, attorney at law, before his death 6 months ago. They show a pattern of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Bank records proving Malcolm Vance paid Indian agent Thomas Whitmore $12,000 over 2 years. Letters discussing plans to acquire Crow land through strategic marriages, and this, she held up the phonograph cylinder. This is a recording made by Samuel Thornton 3 weeks before his death. A clerk wheeled in an Edison standard phonograph on a cart. The machine gleamed brass and oak in the courtroom light. Elizabeth carefully mounted the cylinder onto the mandrel, checked the reproducer, then cranked the handle. The room fell utterly silent. Static hissed from the horn. Then voices emerged, scratchy but unmistakable. Vance's voice. "Whitmore, the squaw must sign by week's end. I need legal documentation before the bastard is born." Whitmore's voice. "She refuses. The tribe suspects." Vance's voice. "Then cut their rations. Winter is coming. Hunger makes people reasonable. And if Thornton persists, Dutch will handle it. A wagon accident. Tragic but unavoidable." The cylinder spun to silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then the courtroom exploded. Reporters stampeded for the doors. Women gasped. Men shouted. A juryman stood up, face red with fury. Judge Miller's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order, I will have order." Judge Miller slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order." Pierce was on his feet, red-faced. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We have no way to authenticate such a recording. It could be fabricated." "It can be authenticated," Elizabeth said. "I have an expert witness, a sound engineer from Denver, prepared to testify to its validity. I also have Deputy Silas Grant, who will testify that he witnessed Samuel Thornton making this recording." Miller's face had gone pale. He looked at the documents spread before him, then at Malcolm Vance, sitting stone-faced at the plaintiff's table. "This court will take a 30-minute recess," Miller said. "I need to examine these materials." The recess stretched to an hour. When Miller finally returned, his face was grim. Whatever he had seen or heard had shaken him, but Jackson could not tell how much. Miller was a political animal. He would be weighing options, calculating risks, trying to figure out how to rule for Vance without looking like a corrupt fool. "This court is back in session," Miller said. "I have reviewed the materials presented by the defense. They are disturbing. However, they are not directly relevant to the question of whether the marriage between Mr. Vance and the defendant was legally binding at the time it was entered into. Therefore, I rule that while these materials may be used in a separate criminal investigation, they do not invalidate the marriage contract." Jackson felt his heart sink. Elizabeth's face showed no emotion, but her hands clenched on the table. "However," Miller continued, "the defense has raised the issue of duress. Miss Brennan, do you have evidence that your client was forced to sign the marriage certificate?" "I do, Your Honor. I call Nahia to testify." Nahia entered the courtroom carrying baby Samuel. She wore a simple dress provided by Cooper's wife, dark blue, modest. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the strong bones of her face. She looked terrified but also determined. She took the witness stand, still holding the baby, and raised her right hand for the oath. Elizabeth approached her gently. "Please state your name for the court." "Nahia, Winter Deer in your language, daughter of Red Sky, chief of the Crow, widow of Standing Bear, warrior. And are you married to Malcolm Vance?" "No, I was forced to sign papers. But in my heart, the eyes of my people, in the eyes of God, I am not his wife. I am Standing Bear's wife. This child is Standing Bear's son. Tell the court what happened on September 15th. Nahia took a breath. Then, in clear, steady English, she told her story. The death of her father, the death of her husband, Malcolm Vance arriving at the agency with papers and threats, the soldiers standing behind her while she signed, the promise that if she did not sign, her people would be driven into the wilderness to die. When she finished, there was silence in the courtroom. Even Pierce seemed at a loss for words. Then Elizabeth asked, "When is the baby's birthday?" 3 days ago. "And when did Standing Bear die?" 11 months ago. Elizabeth turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Simple arithmetic proves this child cannot be Malcolm Vance's biological son. He was conceived before Mr. Vance even approached my client. The entire basis of Mr. Vance's claim that he has a right to this child as his legal heir is built on a lie. Pierce recovered. Biology is not the issue here, Your Honor. Legal paternity is. If the marriage was valid at the time of birth, Mr. Vance is the legal father regardless of biology. Then we must prove the marriage was not valid, Elizabeth said. She turned to the gallery. I call Chief Plenty Coos to testify. The elderly Crow chief rose and walked to the witness stand with the dignity of a king. He wore traditional dress, and he took the oath through an interpreter, though Jackson suspected he understood more English than he let on. Elizabeth asked, Chief Plenty Coos, did you witness a marriage between Nahaya and a Crow warrior named Standing Bear? Through the interpreter, Plenty Coos replied, yes, spring of 1888. I performed the ceremony myself. It was a proper Crow marriage. Horses exchanged, vows spoken, the whole tribe as witness. And in Crow tradition, is such a marriage binding? More than binding, sacred. A Crow woman once married is married for life. Even if her husband dies, she is his widow. She cannot be forced to marry another. Pierce cross-examined. Chief, does the United States government recognize Crow marriages? Plenty Coos looked at the lawyer with contempt. The United States government recognizes many things when it is convenient and ignores them when it is not. But that does not change the truth. Nahia is Standing Bear's wife. This baby is Standing Bear's son. Your papers do not change what is real. The old chief's words hung in the air like a challenge. Judge Miller shifted uncomfortably. He was caught, Jackson realized. Caught between the law, which favored Vance, and justice, which did not. Between his political obligations and his conscience, if he had one. I need time to consider my ruling, Miller said finally. This court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9. Both parties will return at that time for my decision. As the courtroom emptied, Jackson approached Elizabeth. What do you think? He asked. I think, she said quietly, that we presented the truth. Whether that is enough, I cannot say. Miller is not a good man, but he is not entirely corrupt either. He cares about his reputation. If he rules for Vance now, after everything we revealed, he will look like a fool or a villain. But if he rules for us, he makes an enemy of one of the territory's most powerful men. So what does he do? That, Elizabeth said, is what we will find out tomorrow. That night, Jackson could not sleep. He paced his study, poured whiskey he did not drink, stared at portraits of people who were gone. Finally, near midnight, he left the house and walked through the cold streets of Helena. His feet carried him, almost without conscious thought, to the old cemetery on the edge of town where William and Margaret were buried. Their graves were side by side, marked with granite headstones Jackson had imported from Vermont at considerable expense. In the moonlight, he could read the inscriptions. Margaret Thornton, beloved wife. William Thornton, beloved son. The words seemed inadequate, too small to contain the lives they represented. Jackson knelt in the cold grass between the graves. I am trying, he said out loud, his voice rough. I am trying to do what you would want, William. What you did, fighting for someone who cannot fight for themselves. I do not know if it will work. I do not know if I am strong enough, or smart enough, or good enough. But I am trying. The wind whispered through the cemetery trees. Jackson stayed there for a long time, talking to ghosts, asking for forgiveness, searching for strength. When he finally rose and walked back toward home, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Tomorrow would bring a verdict, and with it, either justice or the confirmation that in this world, money and power would always triumph over truth. Jackson did not know which it would be, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened, he had kept his promise to Samuel. He had fought, and that at least was something. The Helena courthouse stood solid and imposing in the morning light, its stone walls casting long shadows across Last Chance Gulch. Jackson Thornton arrived an hour before the proceedings were scheduled to begin, partly from anxiety, partly from old habit. In his years building the Copper Empire, he had learned that the early man gained advantage, saw things others missed, positioned himself before the battle began. But this was not a business negotiation. This was a fight for a child's future, for a woman's freedom, for the memory of his brother and the ghost of his son. The stakes could not be measured in dollars. Marshal Cooper met him at the courthouse steps. The old lawman looked like he had slept even less than Jackson. "Got word from my deputies," Cooper said quietly. "Vance spent half the night meeting with political men. Senator Clark's people, Governor Toole's chief of staff. He is calling in favors, Jackson, putting pressure on Miller from every direction. Will it work? Depends on what Miller values more, his reputation or his future appointments. Right now, could go either way." They entered the courthouse together. The gallery was already filling, word of yesterday's revelations having spread through Helena like wildfire. Jackson saw newspaper reporters from as far as Butte and Missoula. This trial had become more than a local matter. It was becoming a test of whether justice could exist in a territory where wealth and political connections had always determined outcomes. Elizabeth Brennan arrived with Nahia and baby Samuel. The young Crow woman looked exhausted but resolute, dressed in the same simple blue dress, her son wrapped in a blanket against her chest. She met Jackson's eyes across the courtroom and nodded once, a gesture of solidarity. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Miller entered. His face revealed nothing, a mask carved from stone. He carried a leather folder thick with papers, laid it on the bench with a sound like thunder. "This court is in session," Miller intoned. "I have considered the evidence presented yesterday. I have reviewed precedents. I have examined the law from every angle." He paused, and the silence stretched unbearably. "The question before this court is whether the marriage between Malcolm Vance and Nahia was legally binding. The plaintiff presents a marriage certificate, properly witnessed and recorded. The defense claims duress and prior marriage. Both arguments have merit. Both arguments have flaws." Jackson's hands gripped the railing in front of him. "Get on with it," he thought. "For God's sake, get on with it." "However," Miller continued, "having reviewed the evidence of coercion, bribery, and conspiracy presented by the defense, I cannot in good conscience uphold a marriage that was clearly entered into through threats and false pretenses. The marriage between Malcolm Vance and Nahia is hereby annulled. Custody of the child remains with the mother." The courtroom erupted, cheers mixed with outrage. Reporters scrambled for the doors to file their stories. Jackson felt something break open in his chest, a dam of tension he had not realized he was holding. They had won. Against all odds, they had won. But the celebration was premature. Malcolm Vance stood, and something in his posture made the room fall silent. He was 50 years old, tall and impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that could smile while planning murder. Now that face wore no smile at all. It was the face of a man who had just been publicly humiliated and would not accept it. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice dangerously calm, "I accept your ruling on the marriage. However, I am filing new charges. Jackson Thornton knowingly harbored a fugitive. He interfered with a legal order. He conspired with Marshal Cooper to arrest my business associate Thomas Whitmore without proper cause. I demand that Thornton be held accountable." Elizabeth was on her feet immediately. "Those charges are absurd. Mr. Thornton acted to protect a woman in danger." "He acted outside the law," Vance countered. "And in Montana territory, no man is above the law, not even the Copper King." Judge Miller's face hardened. "Mr. Vance, are you prepared to file formal charges?" "I am, Your Honor, and I have witnesses, I have evidence, I have documentation of every law Mr. Thornton broke in his crusade to destroy my reputation." Jackson stood. His voice was steady. "File your charges, Vance. I will face them. I will face you. And when this is over, everyone in Montana will know exactly what kind of man you are." "We shall see," Vance said. "We shall see." The judge gavelled for order. "This court is adjourned. Mr. Vance, you have 48 hours to file charges if you intend to proceed. Until then, Mr. Thornton remains free on his own recognizance." As the courtroom emptied, Jackson pulled Cooper and Elizabeth aside. "He is not going to stop," Jackson said. "This was never just about Nahia or the land. This is about power, about a man who cannot accept losing." "Then we need to end it," Elizabeth said. "Permanently. We need to destroy his ability to hurt anyone else." "How?" "The evidence Samuel collected. It shows crimes beyond what we presented in court. Fraud, embezzlement, possibly murder. If we can get the territorial prosecutor to act, We can put Vance away for years. Cooper shook his head. The territorial prosecutor is in Vance's pocket. Has been for a decade. He will bury any charges we bring. Then we go over his head, Jackson said. We go to the federal government. Land fraud on Indian reservations is a federal crime. We get a U.S. Marshal involved. That will take time, Elizabeth warned. Weeks, maybe months. And in that time, Vance will be free to act, to threaten, to kill. Jackson looked across the courtroom to where Nahia sat, rocking baby Samuel gently. Then we need to keep her safe, and we need to move fast. That evening, Jackson made a decision that would change everything. He called a meeting at his mansion, inviting not just Cooper and Elizabeth, but also Chief Plenty Coos and 3 prominent Helena businessmen who had no love for Malcolm Vance. They gathered in Jackson's study, an unlikely assembly united by a common enemy. Jackson stood before them, his back to the fireplace, feeling every one of his 65 years, but also feeling more alive than he had in decades. "Gentlemen, Miss Brennan," he began, "Malcolm Vance is a cancer in this territory. He corrupts officials, steals land, ruins lives. Today we won one battle, but the war continues, and I propose we end it. Not through more courtrooms, not through more lawyers, through exposure. Through making him so toxic that no politician, no judge, no businessman will touch him." "How?" one of the businessmen asked. "We publish everything," Jackson said. "Every document Samuel collected, every piece of evidence. We put it in the newspapers, all of them. Helena, Butte, Missoula, even papers in Denver and San Francisco. We make Vance's crimes public knowledge. We make him a pariah." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "It could work, but we need to be careful. Publication is not the same as legal conviction. Vance could sue for libel." "Let him sue," Jackson said. "Truth is an absolute defense, and we have the truth." Chief Plenty Coos spoke, his English clear despite his accent. "This will make him desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. They lash out. They hurt whoever they can reach." "I know," Jackson said. "That is why I am moving Nahia and the baby tomorrow to a place Vance cannot find them." "Where?" Cooper asked. "I am not telling anyone, not even you, Marshal. The fewer people who know, the safer she will be." The next morning before dawn, Jackson loaded a wagon with supplies. He woke Nahia, helped her and baby Samuel into the covered back, and drove out of Helena, heading south. But once out of sight of the town, he turned east, then north, doubling back on hidden trails until he was certain they were not followed. Their destination was a place Jackson had not visited in 30 years. A hunting cabin high in the Big Belt Mountains, not the Absaroka cabin where they first met, but a different refuge altogether. One that even Cooper did not know existed, so remote that even most locals did not know it existed. It had belonged to a prospector friend who had left it to Jackson when he died. It had running water from a spring, a good stove, solid walls. It would do. They reached it by evening. Jackson helped Nahia settle in, showed her where the food was stored, how to work the pump for water. Baby Samuel slept, through most of it, exhausted from the journey. "How long must I stay here?" Nahia asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month, until we finish dealing with Vance, until you are safe." She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "You are putting yourself in danger for me, again." "I am putting myself in danger for what is right," Jackson corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" She smiled slightly. "I think you are a better man than you believe yourself to be, Jackson Thornton." He had no answer to that. He left her with a rifle, ammunition, and instructions to trust no one who came to the cabin except him or Cooper. Then he rode back to Helena, arriving after midnight, exhausted but grimly satisfied. The next week moved with brutal speed. Elizabeth, working with cooperative newspaper editors, published the first installment of Samuel's evidence. The headline in the Helena Independent read, "The Vance Conspiracy, How One Man Stole a Territory." The article detailed years of fraud, complete with reproduced documents, witness statements, and financial records. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Other newspapers picked up the story. Politicians who had supported Vance suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. Businesses that had partnered with him scrambled to distance themselves. Within 3 days, Malcolm Vance had gone from one of Montana's most powerful men to a pariah. But Chief Plenty Coos had been right. Desperate men were dangerous. On the 8th night after Nahia had gone into hiding, Jackson was working late in his study when Emma knocked urgently on the door. "Mr. Thornton Sushin, there are men outside with torches." Jackson moved to the window. In the street below, he counted at least 20 men, maybe more. Some wore hoods. All carried torches or lanterns. And at their head, unmistakable in the flickering light, stood Malcolm Vance. Jackson grabbed his Winchester, checked the load, and walked to the front door. He opened it and stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely across his chest. "Get off my property, Vance." The man at the head of the mob bore little resemblance to the composed businessman who had sat in the courtroom. Days of public disgrace had stripped away Vance's civilized veneer, exposing the violent rage beneath. Vance's smile was a terrible thing, full of hate and madness. "You destroyed me, Thornton. You took everything. My reputation, my business, my future. All for what? For a squaw and her half-breed bastard?" "For justice," Jackson said. "Something you would not recognize if it shot you in the face." "Justice," Vance laughed. "There is no justice. There is only power. And tonight, old man, I have the power. These men, they are loyal to me. They know you are the reason their businesses are suffering, their investments failing. You think you can stand against all of us?" Jackson looked at the mob, some faces he recognized. Small business owners, workers, men who had been hurt by the economic fallout of Vance's exposure, men who were angry and looking for someone to blame. "I do not have to stand against all of you," Jackson said calmly. "I just have to make sure that whoever comes through this door first is a dead man. Who wants to be first?" No one moved. Whatever anger they felt, none of them wanted to die for it, but Vance was beyond reason. He pulled a revolver from his coat, raised it toward Jackson. "Then I will do it myself." The shot rang out, but it did not come from Vance's gun. It came from the street, and it hit Vance in the shoulder, spinning him around. The mob scattered as more shots sounded. Marshal Cooper and 6 deputies, Silas Grant among them, the man who had chosen justice over Vance's gold, charged up the street, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons," Cooper bellowed. "All of you! This assembly is illegal. Disperse now or face arrest." The mob broke and ran. Within seconds, the street was empty, except for Vance on his knees clutching his bleeding shoulder. Cooper walked up to him, looked down without sympathy. "Malcolm Vance, you are under arrest for inciting a riot, attempted murder, and about 40 other charges I will think of while we walk to the jail. Get up." Vance looked up at Jackson, still standing on the porch. "This is not over." "Yes," Jackson said quietly, "it is." But it was not. Not yet. 2 days later, fire broke out at the courthouse. It started in the records room, exactly where Samuel's evidence was stored. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived, half the building was engulfed. They saved most of the structure, but the records room was a total loss. Every document, every piece of evidence, reduced to ash. Jackson stood in the ruins the next morning, soot staining his hands, and felt something close to despair. They had copies, yes, but the originals were gone. And without the originals, a good lawyer could argue that the copies were fabrications. "He did this from jail," Elizabeth said, standing beside him. "He still has people loyal to him, people who would rather see evidence destroyed than see him convicted." "Then we are back where we started," Jackson said. "Not quite," Cooper said, joining them. "I got word this morning. A U.S. Marshal is coming from Washington, a special investigator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Seems our newspaper articles caught someone's attention back east. Someone who cares about land fraud on reservations. They are sending a man with authority that supersedes territorial law." "How long?" Jackson asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Can we hold Vance that long?" Cooper's face was grim. His lawyers filed for bail again. With the courthouse burned and the evidence gone, the judge might grant it. "I will fight it, but I cannot promise anything." That night, Jackson could not sleep. He paced his study until nearly 3 in the morning, then finally made a decision. He saddled Thunder and rode through darkness to the cabin where Nahia was hidden. He arrived at dawn, exhausted, and found her sitting outside, baby Samuel at her breast, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "Something has happened," she said. It was not a question. Jackson told her everything. The maw, the shooting, the fire, Vance's likely release, the federal marshal who might arrive too late. When he finished, Nahia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He will never stop. As long as he is alive, he will hunt us. Hunt my son. There is only one way this ends." "We cannot just kill him," Jackson said. "That would make us murderers." "Then what do we do?" Jackson stared at the rising sun, thinking. Then slowly an idea formed. Dangerous, possibly illegal, but it might be their only chance. "We give him what he wants," Jackson said. "We offer him a way out." 3 days later, Jackson arranged a meeting. Not in Helena, but in a neutral location. An old trading post halfway between Helena and Fort Benton, abandoned for years but still structurally sound. He sent word through Vance's lawyers. "Come alone, talk. Find a solution that does not end in more blood." To Jackson's surprise, Vance agreed. Jackson arrived first, along with Marshal Cooper, who insisted on coming despite Jackson's objections. They waited in the dusty main room of the trading post, afternoon sun slanting through broken windows. Vance arrived exactly on time, alone as requested, though Jackson suspected men were hidden nearby. Vance's shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling, but his eyes were clear and calculating. Whatever madness had possessed him the night of the mob had burned itself out in jail. The pragmatic businessman had returned, cold and rational, ready to negotiate his survival. Whatever madness had possessed him the night of the mob seemed to have burned out, leaving only cold intelligence. "You wanted to talk," Vance said. "Talk." "I have a proposition," Jackson said. "You leave Montana. Permanently. I will give you $200,000. Enough to start over somewhere else. California, Oregon, back east. I do not care. But you leave, you never return, and you never contact Nahia or her son again. Ever." Vance laughed, a bitter sound. "You think you can buy me off?" "I think you are a practical man. You are facing federal charges. Your reputation is destroyed. Your business is gone. You have nothing left here except the certainty of prison or worse. Take the money. Start over. Live free. And if I refuse? Then the federal marshal arrives, investigates, and you spend the rest of your life in prison. Or we go to trial again, and this time I will make sure every newspaper in America covers it. You will be famous, Vance. The man who tried to steal a baby to get land. That is the legacy you will leave." Vance's jaw worked. Jackson could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, Vance spoke. $300,000. And you sign a legal document stating that you will never testify against me or encourage others to do so. $250,000, Jackson countered. "And I will sign a document saying I will not pursue charges if the federal investigation is dropped. But I cannot control what others do." $275. $250, final offer. Vance stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "I want it in writing, legal and binding. And I want the money in cash, today." "You will have it by sundown," Jackson said. "And Vance, if you ever return to Montana, if you ever threaten Nahia or her son in any way, the deal is void, and I will hunt you myself. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly," Vance said. The exchange was made that evening at the Bank of Montana in Helena, witnessed by 3 lawyers and Marshal Cooper. Jackson transferred $275,000 in banknotes and gold certificates to Malcolm Vance. In return, Vance signed a document agreeing to leave Montana Territory within 72 hours and never return. 3 days later, Vance boarded a train to San Francisco. Jackson stood on the platform and watched it pull away, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also dissatisfaction. It was not perfect justice. Vance deserved prison, not a comfortable retirement. But sometimes imperfect justice was all you could get. Sometimes you had to settle for protecting the innocent rather than punishing the guilty. The next day, Jackson rode to the cabin in the Big Belt Mountains. He found Nahia outside, hanging laundry, baby Samuel sleeping in a basket nearby. When she saw Jackson's face, she knew. "It is over?" she asked. "It is over. Vance is gone. He will not return. You are free." Nahia sat down slowly on a stump, as if her legs would no longer support her. Tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. Jackson knelt beside her, put his hand on her shoulder. "What do I do now?" she asked. "Where do I go?" "That," Jackson said gently, "is your choice. You can return to your people. Chief Plenty Coos would welcome you. Or," he paused, not sure how to continue. "Or," Nahia prompted, "or you could stay, in Helena, with me, not as a servant or a charity case, but as family. I have that big empty house, rooms that have been silent for years. I thought maybe if you wanted, you and Samuel could live there. I could help with the child. Make sure he gets education, opportunities, teach him about both his Crow heritage and the white world, so he can walk in both." "Why would you do this?" Nahia asked. "Because," Jackson said, "I am tired of being alone. I am tired of living in a house full of ghosts. You and Samuel, you have given me something I thought I had lost. A purpose, a family. Not by blood, but by choice. And sometimes that is stronger." Nahia looked at baby Samuel, then back at Jackson. "I will need to think, to pray. This is a big decision." "Take all the time you need," Jackson said. 1 week later, Nahia arrived at the Thornton mansion with baby Samuel and a single bag of belongings. Jackson met her at the door. "I talked to Chief Plenty Coops," she said. "I told him everything. He said, a Crow woman must choose her own path. If your path leads to the white man's world, walk it with pride, but never forget who you are. So I am here, if you will have us." "Welcome home," Jackson said. In the spring of 1892, 2.5 years after Vance left Montana, a telegram arrived at the Thornton mansion. It was brief, unsigned. Vance deceased, pneumonia, San Francisco County Hospital. No known heirs. Jackson read it once, then fed it to the fire in his study. Some ghost deserved no memorial. He told no one, not even Nahia. The threat was gone. That was all that mattered. The months that followed were strange and wonderful. Jackson had workers renovate the third floor of the mansion, creating a comfortable apartment for Nahia and Samuel, with large windows that looked out over the mountains. He hired a Crow woman from the reservation to help with childcare and to speak Crow with Samuel so the boy would grow up bilingual. He set up trust funds, ensuring that Samuel would have money for education, for business ventures, for whatever path he chose. But more than the practical arrangements, something else happened. The house that had been silent and cold for years began to fill with life. Baby sounds at odd hours, laughter, the smell of Nahia's cooking, a blend of Crow and frontier recipes. Music as Nahia sang old songs to her son. Jackson found himself doing things he had not done in decades, playing with a child, telling stories, teaching. One afternoon when Samuel was 6 months old, Jackson held the baby on his lap and told him about William. "You never met him," Jackson said to the baby, who could not yet understand words but seemed to understand tone. "But he would have liked you. He had a good heart. He died trying to save people he did not even know. That is the kind of man he was. And that is the kind of man I hope you become." Nahia, standing in the doorway, heard this. Later, she said to Jackson, "You are becoming the father you wished you had been." "It is too late for William," Jackson replied. "No," Nahia said, "it is not too late, because William's spirit lives in what you do now, in how you love Samuel, in how you keep his memory alive by being better than you were. That is not too late. That is exactly the right time." On Samuel's first birthday, they held a ceremony. Jackson invited Chief Plenty Coos and a delegation from the Crow Reservation. They held both a white celebration with cake and presents and a Crow naming ceremony where Samuel was formally blessed with his Crow name, Now Kidi Biji, son of Wolf, a name Nahia had whispered to him the night he was born, now spoken before the tribe. "This child will walk in two worlds," Chief Plenty Coos declared. "He will know the ways of his Crow ancestors. He will know the ways of the white world, and he will be a bridge between them. This is a sacred thing." That night, after the guests had left, Jackson sat in his study, looking at a photograph taken earlier that day. It showed him holding baby Samuel with Nahia beside them, and Chief Plenty Coos standing behind, his hand on Jackson's shoulder. 4 generations, 2 cultures, united by choice and circumstance, into something that looked remarkably like a family. On the desk before him lay the contract he had finally signed 3 days earlier. The sale of Thornton Copper and Mining Company to the Eastern Syndicate for $2.3 million. But now, instead of feeling like an ending, it felt like a beginning. He had set aside $1 million in trust for Samuel's education and future. Another $500,000 went to establishing the Thornton Crow School, which would provide education to both Crow and white children. The remaining $500,000 would fund his and Nahia's life, with whatever was left going to Samuel when Jackson died. He had spent his life building an empire of copper and gold. Now, in what remained of that life, he would build something different, a legacy of kindness, of justice, of families created by choice rather than blood. It was not much, but it was everything. 20 years passed like water flowing over stone, shaping everything slowly but inexorably. Jackson Thornton aged as all men age, his hair going white as mountain snow, his body weakening, until by 1909, at 85 years old, he could no longer walk without assistance and spent most of his days in a wheelchair. But his mind remained sharp, and his eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had built an empire and destroyed a tyrant. He sat now on the porch of his mansion, wrapped in blankets against the October chill, watching children play in the yard below. One of those children was Samuel Standing Bear Thornton, now 20 years old, tall and strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's warrior spirit. He had just graduated from the University of Montana with a law degree, the first person of Crow heritage to do so. He was spending a few days at home before leaving to open a law practice in Helena, specializing in Native American rights. Samuel climbed the porch steps and sat beside Jackson's chair. "Grandfather," he said, using the title they had settled on years ago, more accurate than father but closer than friend, "I need to talk to you about something." "I am listening," Jackson said, his voice still strong despite his body's weakness. "Next week I am going to Washington. There is a case before the Supreme Court about tribal sovereignty. The Crow Nation is involved, and they asked me to help with their legal team. It is a big opportunity, but it means I will be gone for months, maybe longer." "Then you should go," Jackson said. "This is exactly the work you were meant to do." "But you are not well. The doctors say I am 85 and dying," Jackson interrupted. "Which is true. But I am not dying today or tomorrow. I will hold on long enough to hear how the case goes. And Samuel, listen to me. I am proud of you. So proud. You have become everything I hoped. A good man, a fighter for justice, someone who uses law as a tool to help people rather than hurt them." Samuel's eyes glistened. "You taught me that, you and my mother. You showed me what it means to stand for something." "Your mother showed you strength," Jackson said. "I just showed you that old men can change, that it is never too late to choose to be better." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over Helena, painting the mountains in shades of copper and gold. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Tell me about William. Tell me about your son." Jackson smiled, remembering. "William was a good man, better than me in many ways. He died a hero, and sometimes I think if William had lived, you would not be here. I would not have gone into those mountains. I would not have found your mother. I would have died alone in this big house, rich and miserable. William's death was a tragedy, but it led to you, and that is something beautiful from something terrible. Life is like that sometimes." "Do you believe in heaven?" Samuel asked. "I did not used to," Jackson admitted. "But now, yes, I think so, because I need to believe I will see them again. William, Samuel, Margaret. I need to believe I will get to tell William what I never told him in life, that I was proud, that I loved him, that he was everything a father could want in a son." "He knows," Samuel said softly. "Somehow he knows." 2 months later, on a cold December morning, Jackson Thornton died peacefully in his sleep. He was 85 years old. He had lived longer than most men of his era, and infinitely better than many. His funeral was one of the largest Helena had ever seen. Business leaders came, politicians, workers from his old mines. But there were also Crow families, dozens of them, who traveled from the reservation to honor the man who had helped their people when few white men would. Chief Plentycoos, now 61 himself, gave a eulogy in Crow that was translated for the white mourners. This man was not born Crow, the chief said, but he became Crow in his heart. He learned that family is not about blood, but about loyalty. That wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with. That a man's true worth is measured not by what he builds, but by who he helps. Jackson Thornton was my friend. He was my brother, and the Great Spirit will welcome him with honors. Jackson was buried between William and Margaret, as he had requested. The headstone, simple granite, read, Jackson Thornton, 1824 to 1909. Father, friend, fighter for justice, he kept his promises. At the reading of the will, there were no surprises. Everything was as Jackson had planned. The mansion became the Thornton Crow Cultural Center, dedicated to preserving both Crow and frontier history. The remaining fortune was split between Samuel and various charitable trusts focused on Native American education and legal aid. But there was one additional item, a letter addressed to Samuel to be opened after Jackson's death. Samuel read it alone in what had been Jackson's study. The handwriting was shaky, but still clearly Jackson's, written perhaps weeks before he died. My dear boy, if you are reading this, I am gone. Good, I was ready. 85 years is more than enough time for anyone, especially someone who wasted as many as I did. But I want you to know something. The last 20 years, the years I spent with you and your mother, were the best years of my life. Better than striking it rich. Better than building an empire. Better than anything. You gave me a second chance at fatherhood, a chance to do it right, to show up, to be present, to say the words I never said to William. I am proud of you. I love you. You are a good man and you will do great things. When you go to Washington, when you argue your cases, when you fight for your people, remember this. Justice is not a destination. It is a journey. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But what matters is that you keep fighting, that you never give up on the idea that the world can be better, fairer, kinder. I failed William in life, but maybe through you I redeemed that failure. Maybe that is all any of us can hope for. To fail, to learn, to try again, to be better. You are my legacy, Samuel. Not the money, not the buildings. You, the man you are, the lawyer you will become, the father you will one day be. That is what I leave behind. That is what matters. Walk in both worlds, son. Be proud of both heritages, and never forget that you come from warriors. Crow warriors and frontier warriors. Men and women who survived impossible things. You carry their strength. I will watch over you, if such things are possible, and I will be proud. With all my love, your grandfather, Jackson. Samuel folded the letter carefully, tears running freely down his face. He placed it in the old leather satchel that had once belonged to Samuel Thornton the elder, the uncle he had never met but whose name he carried. Then he walked to the window and looked out over Helena. The town had grown so much in 20 years. Electric lights now lined the streets. Automobiles were beginning to replace horses. The world was changing, rushing forward into a new century. But some things remained. The mountains still rose sharp and beautiful against the sky. The wind still sang the same songs. And somewhere in the spaces between breath and heartbeat, the spirits of those who had fought for justice still walked, urging the living to continue the work they had begun. Samuel standing bare, Thornton took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and made a promise to the old man who was not his grandfather by blood, but was by every measure that mattered. I will make you proud, he said to the empty room, to the mountains, to the sky. I will keep fighting. I will be the bridge you hoped I would be. I promise. And in the telling of this story, in the remembering of these people who chose family over blood, justice over profit, kindness over cruelty, that promise echoes still, reminding us that it is never too late to change, never too late to fight for what is right, never too late to become the person we should have been all along. Jackson Thornton was buried in winter, but spring came as it always does, and in the warming soil above 3 graves, wildflowers bloomed. White and purple and gold, they grew between the headstones of a man who built an empire, a son who died a hero, a woman who endured with grace, and above all of them, they bloomed in promise that stories like these never truly end. They live on in the children we raise, the justice we fight for, the love we choose to give. That is the legacy. That is what remains when money turns to dust and buildings crumble and even mountains wear away. Love remains. Justice remains. The choice to stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves remains. And that, in the end, is enough. That is everything.